let's get to this Bill Belichick news. Now, as we are recording this, this is a Wednesday that we are recording this. And so as of right now, it is still not official whether Bill Belichick will or will not be the head coach at North Carolina. But I believe that point is actually moot because the bigger discussion is whether someone like Bill Belichick or Bill Belichick himself, would it work in college football? And I think that's a bigger question and one that's actually much more fascinating to talk about now than, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago. So let's get into it. I want to talk about both why I think it could work and why I think it wouldn't work. And we'll see which one you land on, because I feel like I'm going to talk myself into a position here, and we'll land on something as a bit of a thesis at the end. So let's start with why I think it will work. First of all, in the new age, modern style of college football, I believe that the evaluation of talent is paramount. Not just the recruiting of talent, but the evaluation of talent. Because it's just a different way that we are constructing rosters now versus 4, 5, 6 years ago, and then throughout the history of college football. Because it's such an annual cycle of constructing these rosters due to the transfer portal, due to high school recruiting, it really matters who you're bringing in on an annual basis. So the evaluation of talent is really important. Well, that's one of the areas that I think Bill Belichick would really excel. I don't think that there's been many guys in the history of our sport, any level, that has evaluated talent better than Bill Belichick. Think of all the value he got out of guys, whether they were veterans when he would bring them in on 1 and 2 year contracts, whether it was middle to late round draft picks that he got a ton of value out of and understood how to get that value out of them on the football field. So when it comes just to evaluating talent, as that becomes more paramount and important in college football, a guy like Bill Belichick would absolutely thrive in that environment. Now, one other thing that I think that we're moving into is that you can't just evaluate the talent, but then you have to value that talent. Remember, in April, we're going to get this settlement done from the Alston case, and that settlement between the NCAA is going to allow schools to revenue share. And now what you're going to see is more of an even footing in terms of the budget that schools have to share with their players as it relates to the revenue share based on the television contract. So it's not just how you evaluate the player, but it's how you value that player. You're basically going to be working under a salary cap. I believe that most programs, after having all these discussions in Las Vegas over the last couple of days, I think most programs are earmarking, in terms of their revenue share, between $16 and $18.5 million per year for football. All right. Now, you can share about 20 to 22, maybe 23 million in revenue share. The rest will be men's basketball, women's basketball, and some other sports. But about $16 to $18.5 million will be allocated to the football program. So you're going to have to really be smart in terms of who's getting those dollars. So you've got to evaluate the talent in order to bring them on the roster, and then you've got to value that talent correctly in terms of the revenue share. Well, that's a pro model. Bill Belichick did that as well as anybody in the history of the NFL. That's why they were able to sustain such an incredible dynasty over essentially 2 decades in a league that does everything to drive parity. They don't want dynasties in the NFL. Everything in the NFL is designed to be 8-8, and yet he sustained success in large part due to the fact that he was a great evaluator, and then he valued that talent properly in terms of the way that they paid those players, and I think that is coming to college football. We can see that. That's on the horizon. That's why everybody is moving towards a GM model, and you're starting to have a pseudo front office in a lot of these college football programs, which I think is the right way to go. Another thing that we've seen in modern college football is that parity is now an actual thing. You see, in the middle of the 4-team playoff era, folks, there was one way to construct your roster and one path to win in a national championship. You had to stockpile with 5 stars. You had to be an elite recruiting class in the top 2, 3, 4 in all of the country. And then there was a very narrow path in order to go and win a national championship. Okay? Well, now it's very different. There's a lot more parity in college football. I believe that there aren't any great teams, but there are a lot more good teams. Again, a lot more like an NFL model. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that coaching on the field is going to matter a lot more. The value of a great coach, an in-game coach, a guy that can coach I would say the specificity of situation and do it well, they're going to have a lot more value. They're going to have a lot more success. Well, again, that is exactly where Bill Belichick is strong. So as the college game moves and morphs and evolves towards a pro model, as much as we all fight against that and we hate that and we don't want it to be the NFL, okay, that's fine. But as it gets closer to that, and as we have these things that are NFL principles, a guy like Bill Belichick can and will succeed at the college level. I fully believe that. I think that the current state of the top of college football is flat as it's ever been. So if you get a guy that does all of these things well, evaluates well, values that talent properly, is great on the field in terms of situations and coaching through those things, can construct a roster on an annual basis and not a 4-year rolling basis, all things that he would excel at. Because of the flat nature of college football, we have seen that teams can make a jump right away. We've seen it with Indiana. We've seen it with Colorado. We've seen it with Arizona State. We've seen it with SMU. Look at all of these teams. Look at who's in the college football playoff this year, for goodness sakes. Right? Like, this sport is ready for someone like Bill Belichick more than it's ever been. So that's why I think it could and maybe will work. Now, what are some of the reasons that maybe this won't work? Before we get into why I think it won't work or why I think it wouldn't work, let's actually ask some of his former players, which Kurt Menefee did this week on Fox NFL Sunday. Check this out.
We heard this week that Bill Belichick is actually interviewing for college jobs. Can you imagine him coaching college?
No.
Absolutely not.
I think there's a lot of things he can do, and obviously he's tremendous, and even showing his personality. But getting out there on the recruiting trail and dealing with all these college kids, that would be.
Could you imagine
with NIL?
Yeah.
Like,
could you imagine Bill
nonsense?
on a couch
Listen,
recruiting an 18-year-old?
You really want to come here? I mean, we don't really want you anyway, but I mean, I guess you could come. We'll figure out if you play.
Bring your parents and use them as a third party, you're gone. You're off the team. We're direct.
Some scar tissue built up here amongst these guys.
Oh, that was amazing listening to those guys. Of course, that was Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski and Tom Brady. And listen, they are right. And what they were describing there without actually saying it is that Belichick was one of the more ruthless and transactional coaches that we've ever seen in the NFL. Now, maybe there have been more. Maybe Parcells was like that a little bit as well, but he was a transactional guy. Think about the lack of emotion that he had to have to do things like let Lawyer Malloy go and Tom Brady and all these Rodney Harrison, all these different guys throughout the years, that it's like those guys helped him win championships. And then that sentiment, it was like once he felt like they couldn't help him anymore, it was like, okay, it's transactional. Like, bring me somebody else. All right. And that's not really the way college football has been. In fact, what most college football coaches will tell you is that you can't be transactional and you have to be more relational because of the recruiting, the age, all those different things. Now, the other side of this and the big difference, I think the biggest difference when you talk with coaches that have been at both levels is they'll talk about the time that they get with the players. You see, at the NFL level, you've got all the time in the world. You've got all day, every day. With your players, you can walk through, you can meet, you can walk through again, you can meet. You've got all off season, you've got all the time in the world. And so you can really narrow in on schematics, situations, all the things that the Patriots were really great at and Bill Belichick was really great at the NFL level takes time. That's one thing that you don't have in college football. So if the NFL is very transactional with all the time in the world, college football is very relational with a lack of time. So that doesn't really mix. And I've seen guys that have had a hard time moving from the NFL back to the college level because of those issues. But here's the thing. As the transactional nature of college football changes from the player's side first, because they can leave at any time. Remember, we're seeing that right now with the transfer portal window wide open. If it's transactional on the player's side, then it's going to start to be transactional on the coach's side as well. And so our sport is going to become more transactional every single year. And we see this in real time every single day. Players that are starters, that are captains, leaving for the transfer portal. So I don't think it's actually as big of an issue now that Bill Belichick is a ruthless transactional style coach, because I think that could actually work at this level. And this idea that it's like he's going to be in the living room of a recruit sitting on a couch trying to give him the warm fuzzies about why, mom should let their son come up to North Carolina and play for Bill Belichick, I think that's a fallacy as well. Deion Sanders has proved that. Deion Sanders doesn't go on home visits, and he's working out just fine. And he's been able to capture a really strong roster and some of the best players in college football, and looks to continue to do that during this transfer portal window. So this notion that it has to be the old school way of relational recruiting, I think, is a fallacy. So that's going to be minimized in my book. The timing issue is the timing issue. You don't have the amount of time with college players as you do with NFL players, and I think that would be a little bit hard on him. I really do. What's my biggest takeaway from this? I believe it would work. And I think it would be great for college football. I really do. I think that we're going to see athletic departments turn more into corporate structures. I think ADs need to act more like CEOs. There needs to be a C-suite, because the AD's phone can't ring with every single problem in the athletic department. Head coaches are going to have to share responsibility with people like GMs, and we're seeing GMs hired all over the place. In fact, news this week, Andrew Luck going to be hired at Stanford as the new general manager of Stanford football. You're seeing this all over the place. I met a bunch of guys that are GMs across college football this week in Las Vegas. So as college football changes and morphs, what's happening is that guys like Bill Belichick can succeed. And I'll go back to this idea of narrow paths and wide paths. 5 and 6 years ago, folks, in the middle of the 4-team playoff era, there was one way to recruit a roster, there was one way to stack a roster, and there was one way to go win a national championship. That was it. And that's why we saw the exact same teams every year compete for the national championship. And they were constructed in largely the same way. Now, that's vastly different. Vastly different. Look at all the different styles of teams in terms of roster construction are playing in the college football playoff. You've got Rhett Lashley at SMU. You've got Kurt Cignetti in Indiana. You've got Kenny Dillingham in Arizona State. And you've got the Kirby Smarts in Georgia and the Ryan Day at Ohio State. You've got them all. You've got them all in there. There are more ways to succeed in college football now than there ever has been. So when you look at an outside-of-the-box style hire, like potentially Bill Belichick at North Carolina, I'm going to say this unequivocally. I think it would absolutely work. Players want to know that they've got a path towards the NFL. That is their number one goal. They would love to win a championship along the way, but their number one goal is to go to the National Football League. They'd love to make some money as well, and you can promise them that, and it can be transactional and all those things. But they want to go to the NFL, and if he's going to build a program that is basically an NFL program, he can tell all of those kids, whether they're in the transfer portal or a high school recruit, you come here and I will prepare you to go to the National Football League. That will work. It will work. My only question would be his age. I think 73, you'd be 73 to start next season. I think that's how long does he want to do that? I'm not sure. You hear all this different news about he's throwing in these little caveats about how he wants his son to be the coach in waiting. Here's what I say about that. I don't pay those much attention, because do you know how many times I've actually seen a coach in waiting clause in a contract come to fruition? Very few times. Very few times. It's a way to retain an assistant coach that is very popular, that could go somewhere else. It's a way to give him a little bit more money, maybe a title. If he says that he wants his son to be a head coach, like maybe he will be a head coach, but I don't pay that much. I don't give it much stock. Do I think it would work? Yes. And am I here for it? Yes. And do I think it would be really good for the sport? Yes. All of that. So if he hasn't made a decision, Bill, if you haven't made a decision and you're listening to the Joel Klatt Show, jump in, man. Water's warm. College football is awesome. It's the dawn of the golden age of college football. Haven't you heard? The listeners have heard that over and over and over again. And this is just another example of it. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.